What's up and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello! My name is Erica and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about Jennifer Saint's Greek mythology retellings. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. Just a bit of a disclaimer before we dive into all of the gossip and discussion about these books. It's important that you guys know, in case this is the first time that you are tuning in, I do have a long-standing relationship with Jennifer Saint. She has come on the channel multiple times, and prior to this video, I did individual uploads of reviews when it comes to these books, so each book got their own individual video at the time, during publication, when I had read them, posted them online, all of that kind of stuff. I really wanted to do this video because obviously, even in those videos, not everything was positive. I am always going to prioritize being honest with you guys. I'm always going to prioritize letting you guys know my personal opinions and my true opinions when it comes to, are these books worth your money? Are they worth your time? It's my job. And I'm very aware that it is my job to be honest with you guys, to try and get you to be nerds. So I have no issues telling you guys if something isn't good. I have no issues saying I love something, however, I didn't like this element of it, or if you find this tricky, I completely understand that. All of that kind of stuff is integral to my mission online. But with all that being said, let's talk about the books. At the time that I'm posting this video, 4 books by Jennifer Saint are currently out on the market. The first was Ariadne, followed by Elektra, then Atalanta, and Hera. So if you're watching this like 5 years in the future, I do not know if Jennifer has released another 5, 4, 3, maybe only 1, whatever it happens to be at the time that we are recording. Only 4 books are currently out. Let's start by talking about Ariadne, since that was all of our introductions to Jennifer Saint. And let me tell you, when this book was released, like when the title was released, not even the book itself was on the market, when just the concept of the book was announced online, the nerds went wild. The Greek myth of Ariadne is attached directly to the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. So most people know Theseus coming from Athens, going to Crete, getting into the labyrinth, slaying the Minotaur, saving everybody from this terrifying thing. That's the story that most people know, but very few people who are not either mythology nerds, classicists, have studied this, are aware that there is a woman who is attached to the story who is Ariadne. She's incredibly popular even in the ancient world. There are so many references to Ariadne here, there, and everywhere. We know that lots of people took her story and rewrote it amongst the ancients. Not all of them survive, obviously, such is the way with studying the ancient world. But we know that she was an integral part to their arc of Theseus, right? To the story of Theseus, Ariadne was never absent. So the idea that Jennifer Saint decided, I'm going to take this person and I'm going to make her the focal point of my book and tell the really famous myth, but from her perspective, was not, you know, what people online like to do. And they you know, they'll complain and they'll be like, Greek myth, the feminist retellings, no, there are some, I agree with that narrative where it's like, you're really just grasping at straws here to make this like feminist. Ariadne is not on the same level. Not Jennifer Saint's book and not the myth either. Like, this is a very important character. So when Jenny took this character and said, this is the book, the nerds were like, hell yes. And let me tell you, the book did not disappoint. It is one that I continue to recommend to everybody simply because she did such a phenomenal job by really presenting Ariadne and also Ariadne's immediate family. Because not only are we told Ariadne's story and Theseus' story, but we are also told her sister Phaedra's story. And this was perfect. Because when we had Ariadne's story, which is incredibly dramatic, incredibly fun, incredibly dynamic, there is a point where it kind of lulls. Obviously, as with mythology, as with any story, it's sort of like, okay, well now what? Like, we're halfway through the book. Where are you going? Because you've already finished the Minotaur episode. Now what? Jennifer used this opportunity to splice in Phaedra's story, which is another incredibly popular ancient story, like amongst the ancients, but one that is not known to a modern audience. And the reason why I love this so much is because it really showed us in Jennifer Saint's first book how she was not only going to be telling you stories of really fabulous characters that were famous to the ancients, who deserved the time of day in the modern world, but also how she was going to start creating a web, right? The web that us nerds are aware of, the web that classicists don't have to actually like write down, like because we've read absolutely everything, because we have nothing else better to do, but a web that needs to be ironed out for people who have always been interested in Greek mythology, but don't really know where to start. By kind of saying, hey, why don't you try with this character first? Here are all of the other characters that are associated with them. And I loved the idea of putting Ariadne and Phaedra in the same story, because in the ancient world, they are not put in the same story. There's a fun fact. So by having Jennifer look at them and just say, let's just connect them both together, you guys, the reader, the newbie, got the chance to see Ovid's version, who is a Roman poet, but still, you know, kind of rewrote all of these Greek myths. See Ovid's version of both of these women and the Euripides play, which is all about Phaedra, and it's actually called Hippolytus, but still, you get to hear all of that drama that happens with Phaedra in one book. And I think it was such a strong start to Jennifer's career from my perspective, but also from general readers' perspective of this is what I am going to do with my career. I am going to be highlighting really interesting characters. I'm going to be making everything beautifully lyrical. I mean, just, oh my God. I mean, I just love this book, and I will always continue to recommend it to people who are newbies as well as people who are experts in Greek myth. I think Jennifer did such an incredible job out the gate. I will always have a soft spot for Ariadne. The second book that Jennifer Saint released is Elektra. Now just so you guys know, I do own Ariadne. I have just lent it to a friend, and I decided that this video could not wait until she was done. But I do have Elektra here with me, and this is a retelling of the Trojan War from Elektra, Cassandra, and Clytemnestra's perspective. Now this, I have to admit, when Jennifer said after Ariadne she was going to be releasing Elektra, I was quite confused. Now the reason is because when it came to Ariadne, that was a woman who most people don't know, that people deserve to know, had such a fascinating story of her own right, like after the Theseus instance, that I was like, what a brilliant first choice. And like I said, really indicated that that was what she was going to be doing with the rest of her career. And Elektra, to me, from the offset, and I do want to make this very clear, from the offset, seemed like it didn't really fit with that idea and with that standard, I guess. Standard is the wrong word, but you guys know what I mean. Like, it just didn't really fit together with Ariadne as seamlessly as I thought it would. And I think the reason behind that is really because a lot of authors at the time were announcing Trojan War retellings. A lot of them, if they hadn't announced them, they had already written them, and they were kind of these independent books that I had read or that I had engaged with that were coming out in traditional publishing now. And so Elektra just kind of seemed, from the offset, and I do want to make this clear, it just seemed like it was jumping on a bandwagon because that's what was popular. So when I was sent this proof, I very much told myself that I was just going to kind of read it in private, maybe not say anything about it, maybe not talk about it, because I loved Ariadne so much, and I never want to upload like a bad review just for the sake of a bad review. It will always be with analysis attached to it, things like that. So I just thought with this regard, if it's not like, you know, something that I can go in and analyze and pick apart in that way, I'm just not going to say anything about it. I'm just going to say I didn't have the time to read it. Like, I had thought of all of the excuses when this arrived in the mail. That's the point that I'm trying to get across here. However, when I read Elektra, I completely understood what Jennifer was trying to do with this book, and how this was not a cash grab. This was not just trying to hop on a bandwagon. Clearly, what Jennifer was doing was she was trying to show people with mythology that people were already familiar with what kind of a writer and an author she was. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at these tabs. These are all tabs of details of the Trojan War, right? From the myths. I went through and I was like, here is, you know, this quote from this person. Here's this quote from this person. Here's this note from maybe this author, all of that kind of stuff. There are so many tabs here. They're not color-coded. Don't worry, I just kept running out of colors. But what they are is an absurd amount of notes from various different sources. And the way that Jennifer so seamlessly tied all of those into one narrative, for me, emphasized how meticulous and how much of an actual classicist Jennifer is. Because if you guys don't know, she does have a degree in classics and then she went on to be a teacher in English literature. But this book for me really solidified her as not a Greek myth enthusiast, not somebody that's always looked at that world and just thought, oh, what a fun place to set a novel. Like, no. This woman is a classicist. These are her roots. This book was not an attempt to just sell a name that everybody already knows. It was her way of saying, trust me in the future when I start going in a different direction. I've linked all of my interviews with Jennifer in the description below, and I would highly recommend of all of them that you check out the one about Elektra, because we talked for such a long time about all of the sources, about what she was trying to take from each individual one, the voices that she found, and why she wanted to follow these women in so many different areas of their lives as well, in different storylines, and kind of go down those routes. And I just loved that chat with Jennifer. I think to date, it's probably my favorite one. And I think that Elektra is definitely the most impressive work that Jennifer has done with the source material. I will stand by that, at least at this point, with all of her books. This one terrified me with how much she could pack into one not terribly long book, right? Let's clarify that. This is a totally approachable book, an easy one for anyone to pick up. And the amount that was in there was so impressive. I was completely blown away. But moving on into publication number 3, Jennifer released Atalanta. Now these, if you guys haven't realized, all of my books, the 3 that I have anyways, are proofs. So Elektra and Atalanta do look this way. Hera, my copy of Hera looks a little bit different. However, I was sent Atalanta after I completely loved Elektra. I supported Jennifer when she released Ariadne, talking to you guys about it, all of that kind of stuff. And when I received Atalanta, I must admit, I had been waiting for this book for a while. This is also why I was slightly confused about Elektra, because the first time that I spoke to Jennifer about Ariadne, so years and years ago when we sat down on Zoom to talk about Ariadne, I had asked her a question that was, what's your favorite Greek myth? And she said, oh, I've always loved Atalanta. That's always been my favorite. And I very cheekily at the time was like, ooh, can we expect that to be your next book? And she was like, cut this part of the interview. So she told me then that she wanted to work on Atalanta, that she was going to need some more time to work on it, to figure out how to package and parcel it, I guess, for the general reader. Because, like I said, Ariadne was attached to such a famous myth, Theseus and the Minotaur, everybody knows that. Elektra is part of the Trojan War, so everybody's really familiar with that as well. Atalanta, although she's attached to Jason and the Argonauts, is not always attached to Jason and the Argonauts. So she's a really interesting mythological character, but she's not always a part of that story. And in fact, the one really famous version of the Jason and the Argonauts myth that we have from the ancient world, which is by Apollonius of Rhodes, does not include Atalanta. Now, there is a note of Atalanta. So in book 1, we are told that Atalanta walks down to the beach. She asks Jason, hey, can I come on the Argo with you guys? Go off to go and find the Golden Fleece and go to Colchis and all this. And Jason says, no, women are too distracting. None of them on the boat. So there's that. So with the publication of Atalanta, this was basically, if we kind of look at Jennifer's journey up until Atalanta, it was first book, I can take a character who you don't know that's attached to a story that I do know. Second book was, here's how much of the ancient sources that I can weave into a story without it completely overwhelming you, making it a really natural part of this narrative, all of that kind of stuff. Atalanta was her saying, now we're going to get to the interesting stuff. This is what I want to be doing. Because Atalanta was really fabulous in telling us Atalanta's story, also telling us the story of Jason and the Argonauts, because that's the bulk of this book, is Atalanta going on the Argo. And again, I spoke to Jennifer about why she chose to do this and about why this was the version that she told us, etc., etc. So you guys can check that out in the description below. However, she also started combining a lot of outside myths with regards to Artemis, for example, the Greek goddess Artemis. Those were seamlessly woven in. And things like that came up throughout this book that were not necessarily directly attached to Atalanta, but to the characters around Atalanta, to the goddesses that she would have come into contact with, to the world, right? That was where Jennifer really started getting creative and saying, let's layer this on this, because I can tell you these two myths, even though in the stories they're not happening at the same time necessarily. Okay, well, caveat. When it comes to a timeline of Greek myth, you can't really do that. But what I mean is, like, if you're reading Ovid, one story pops up in like book 2 and the other one in like book 8, right? That's what I'm trying to say. It's not necessarily a timeline because everybody's timeline is different. In the ancient world, let's stress that. But these stories don't normally get tossed together. And Jennifer, when it came to Atalanta, really showed us how she could layer seamlessly and effortlessly when it comes to her work. I was so excited for Atalanta and I adored it. And I think it's the one that I resonated the most with. And the reason is because Atalanta was a character that I didn't know until I was like 14 years old, which I know sounds silly when I'm like, till I was 14. But at the age of 11, I assumed it was only men in the Greek mythological world, which is not the case at all. Atalanta was the first character that I encountered where I went, whoa, who's this? And the excitement of reading that myth for the first time and learning that name for the first time is something that I distinctly remember so, so well. Like, I just remember that feeling of elation and like wanting to dive further and further into this world, knowing that somebody like Atalanta was written thousands of years ago and that people were so entranced by her. And that is the same feeling I got when reading Atalanta by Jennifer Saint. It was a book that I think I would have loved at that age. It was one that I think is probably her riskiest one of the 4 that have been published. It was such an oddball character. And Jason and the Argonauts are not having their moment because Jason's really getting a hate moment. So I adore this one. I think people need to be reading it more and more because this is not a case, again, as I said with Ariadne, it's not a case of people kind of being like, oh, feminism. Like, yes, sometimes that happens. Sometimes we get stories where you're like, why are you telling it from this woman's perspective? She's about to die. There is no point. We don't need a feminist, voice in this story. This is a man's story. That's completely fine. This is from the Greek myths, straight from the sources. There are lots of women who are highlighted in this book as well as lots of men, obviously. And I just think that it was done beautifully well. And this really was the first book that I really started to look at Jennifer Saint's writing style. This became incredibly lyrical and linked so beautifully into Hera. See, this is what I mean that like my covers look different now, but the book ended up looking like this. But the lyrical writing of Atalanta really started to shine in Hera. Now, let's talk about my thoughts before Hera came out. When I was told that the next Jennifer Saint book was going to be Hera, I was so confused. And by confused, I don't mean like with Elektra, I was looking at the market and I was going, oh God, Jenny's kind of done blah, 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 blah. No, this was a case of me going, what are you talking about? You're going to retell Hera. Reason being is because when it comes to Greek myths, there is a start, middle, and an end. Right? That's how stories work. They don't have any stories like that of the Greek gods. There is no like, the Greek god is born, and then this is the pinnacle of their story, and then this is how they fall or die or, I don't know, stop being believed in. Like that narrative doesn't exist. It's like, here's how the gods were born, and then they existed forever, and they just hated lots of people, and then they liked lots of people, and there's a war in the middle of it, and they punished them. That's how those stories are. Now, I trusted Jennifer at that point. I did. As a consumer of her work, I was like, I believe that she's going to do a good job with this, even though I don't know what in the world she wants to do with it at all. So when my book arrived in the mail, I will admit that it took me a hot second to get to it. I was really skeptical. I did not know if you could take a Greek goddess and tell her story in one way that was going to work for a narrative. I thought, like, what is she going to do? Just kind of fizzle out at the end? I had no idea. And finally, when I came to it, and I sat my booty down, for one, this is by far, at this point of, Jennifer's career, her best written book. I thought the writing was insane. Every single sentence I wanted to highlight and be like, God, I wish I wrote that. I'm not an author, but like the idea that I can't string words together that way made me upset. Like, it's so beautiful. Like, every single sentence, there's like this particular cadence and rhythm to it where it really does sound like she's writing song lyrics throughout the entire thing. Like, the whole thing reads as if it's this beautiful poem. It's just so unfair that one person can write this way. But in particular, this book really combined everything that I've been saying about the previous books. We saw so many different hero myths, and yet we got this incredibly creative take on what it means to write a story about a Greek mythological goddess or god. You know, if anybody else wants to take it and kind of do it in this style, Jennifer really paved the way for so many people to be able to publish a book if you so wish to be called Artemis or whatever it is. Like, she's really shown everybody this is how you do it. And it's a perfect combination of her being creative in a fictional sense and really saying, okay, what is the character arc that I want to do? Like, what is Hera's mission going to be? And then having all the Greek myths layered on top. So this book spans thousands of years. It is a really perfect example of what you can do when it comes to a timeline, of what you can do when it comes to hiding things throughout the narrative, of, again, slapping on different myths, like I said with Elektra. Like, we saw her do this in Elektra, where it was, here's how much I can put into one book seamlessly. And with Atalanta, we saw how she could find connections between different myths that don't necessarily appear together in the sources, but there's no reason for why they shouldn't. It was really both of those clinging together in this book with the most incredible writing and the excitement of Ariadne, because like Ariadne, there's a really big myth attached to that, really big myth. And when it comes to Hera, she's the queen of the gods. You don't need any more of an introduction than, we are going to tell you the story of the queen of the gods. That's it. Same with Ariadne. We are going to tell you about the story of Theseus and the Minotaur from the woman who made the whole thing happen, right? Like a really quick pitch. So it was almost like all of these books were training for this book. And this book was just brilliant. I mean, overall, all of Jennifer's books are beautifully accurate whilst being really creative, presenting these ideas to a modern audience in a fabulous new way, whilst remaining really reliably close to the source material. So it won't be a hard jump, and this is the point of this whole video, I guess, in all of my reviews, is for me to tell you, can you go from these books to the source material? Will you be lost? You know, is this so different from the source material that there's no point? Just read the source material. These books, and probably anything that Jennifer writes in the future, obviously put a little asterisk next to that, because if there is a book that I don't like in the future, I will obviously tell you guys. But at this point, everything that Jennifer has written has been a fabulous introduction to the ancient world. And I am convinced that everything that she will write afterwards is going to get better and better and better. Like, what a fabulous way to weave together an entirely new Greek mythological world for people, whilst being such a great jumping off point to getting people to be nerds. Oh, I can't wait to see the rest of Jennifer's career. I really, really can't. And I'm so excited to be able to be a part of that, and to also say that I've been a part of it from the beginning, because it's just been so exciting every single year to see Jennifer continue to publish and to continue to find the most incredible success that she absolutely deserves. So it goes without saying that you guys can find all of the interviews that I've done with Jennifer up until this point, up until the release of Hera, linked in the description below. You guys can also order the books via the affiliate links that are down there, and I've included some other fun things like Jennifer's socials and all of that kind of stuff, because you are definitely going to be wanting to follow along for the rest of her career. I am so excited with book 5, and I will be back talking about all things Jennifer Saint when that gets released. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's episode, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.